Hello all, Creeparoni here. What you'll hear in this video are submissions to my Halloween Creepypasta contest. You can show your support for the stories you like most by commenting below, and your feedback will help me decide a winner on October 28th, 2016. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy what these talented writers have to offer. I'm writing this to help anybody else who has my disease. Everybody I've seen about this, whether it was a doctor or some voodoo freak, has called it the exact same thing. Inhuman's disease. It's a very hard disease to live with. Let me explain from the beginning. My name is Cole Blackwell, and I used to be normal. I used to have black hair, green eyes, and very high cheekbones. All of that changed when I was about 12 years old. Puberty really is a bitch. At first, the normal stuff happened. Hair spread to my face and groin. I slowly grew from 5'3" to 5'8", and I started having special thoughts about girls in my classes. By the time I was 14, I was at a pause in my growth, and that's when the Inhuman's disease hit me. It started when I noticed this black mark on my chest. I didn't think anything of it at the time, and I let it slide. It wasn't a good idea. It slowly began spreading. I used to wear a lot of tank tops, and that's how my mom noticed when her pale son suddenly had a black mark engulfing his shoulder. 20 minutes after she noticed it, I was in the ER, getting tested like a kid in the hospital. After many, many painful tests, Dr. Bowles came into my room and told me about Inhuman's disease. What was really important to me was the fact there isn't a cure, due to this disease being just too rare. So I'm stuck with it. Soon I noticed more side effects from Inhuman's disease. My skin that used to be paler than a goth chick was now almost completely black. My teeth had become sharper. My once slowly increasingly hairy body was now void of any, and I had grown amazingly from 5'8" to 7'3". With this painfully unattractive appearance, I became very self-conscious, only leaving my own room once in a truly blue moon. On the rare chance I do leave my room, I leave in an assortment of heavy clothes, sweaters, hoodies, cargo pants, boots, etc. I knew it wasn't a good idea to stay in my room until I died, so I was trying to become more used to the outside world. By going out every once in a while, just to get out of my ugly disease-ridden shell. I was doing better. Riding the train is real progress for someone like me. That's public transport. It was going well for me until one day some snot-nosed little brat started yelling to his mother about me. The child yelled, "Mommy, why is he so tall? Why is he wearing that hood and jacket? Mommy, does he have cancer?" Soon the mother got tired of answering the kid's questions and started ignoring the child in a seemingly endless barrage of ridiculous questions. The kid must have gotten tired of his mother ignoring him, so this little brat decided to go get answers for himself. This little brat rushed over to me and yanked off my hood, exposing my face to everyone on the train. My face, fully covered in black skin with my green eyes and my very visible cheekbones. The kid screamed in horror upon seeing me. When the child screamed, everybody on the train car turned to see me and the living horror story, aka my face. I could feel everybody staring at me with disgust. It's good I didn't open my mouth for any reason and show everyone my big fang-like teeth. When the train reached another station and stopped, I put my hood back on and rushed out the nearest door. As I walked to the exit stairs leading to the outside world, I was stopped by some teenage boys, 3 to be exact. 2 were in front of me, blocking, while the last pulled my hood down behind me. The boys were staring at me as I stared back. I was so angry. I was used to people treating me like this, but it wasn't really anything new. Soon I noticed more and more people gathering around staring at me, forming a mob, a large group of people astonished at my appearance, just staring at me. This became worse when everybody in this mob started yelling insults and swears at me while throwing trash at me. They shouted things such as, "Get lost, freak," and threw whatever they could find in the nearest garbage bin, including the garbage bin. This wasn't new. I learned that people didn't like it when things are different or out of the normal. I tried to leave the mob sucking up all the abuse, but that's when I was stopped again. Except this time by a man. I didn't take note of his face, but I did take notice of his behavior as he pushed me back into the center of the circle, surrounded by this mob I had created. As time grew longer, more people became part of this mob, and more people threw trash and yelled at me. As most mobs do end in violence, this one did too. Centered around me, people started throwing punches at me again and again. I refused to fight for a while. I was used to this combination of mental and physical abuse. During the beating I was trying to endure, I snapped. I started fighting back, punching, scratching, and yes, even biting. With some time, my abusers were down, my clothes were scraps, and I was both bleeding and covered in blood. That didn't help when the cops found me standing amongst a mob of hurt people, where everyone was either bleeding, covered in blood, or both. It's too bad the cops were the shoot first, ask questions never type. To avoid the cops, I ran into the train tunnels to escape. As I ran into the tunnels, I could hear the cops running after me and yelling at me. They called me a monster. They called me a demon. Same as the people in the mob. After a while, I got tired of running, and I decided to do what everybody wanted me to do. I jumped the cops. I ripped the eyes out of one and beat the other unconscious and left him on the train tracks. I heard more cops coming, so I continued my escape into the train tunnels. Eventually, the tunnels stopped, and the trains reached above ground. Now I live next to the train tunnels. I'm what everybody wanted me to be. I'm a demon, a monster. In the beginning, I said I was writing this to help others with my disease. If anyone has Inhuman's disease, just end it. Save yourself the trouble of being publicly convicted of being a demon. Kimberly Iris was a hyperactive tomboy who loved to explore. She always made the strangest friends, mainly boys, who loved to explore and get into trouble as well. Kim's two best friends were Jason Chaston and Vince Adam, two of the boys whom she attended many classes with and loved to spend much of her time with over the weekends. Vince was a boy whose personality did not match his appearance. He was short and scrawny, yet strong and fast. Vince wore glasses, making him look like a nerd, and, though not the brightest, he had good logic and seemingly more common sense than Jason. Jason was not fat, but not very thin. He was what many would call husky, with nice muscle tone from playing football. When Kim was with this rowdy group of troublesome boys, she was treated no greater and no less than any of the others who often joined them. Much of their time together was spent wandering around Jason and Vince's neighborhood, exploring the canals for turtles and snakes, playing truth or dare, play fighting, and setting up ambushes to prank other members of their group. One day, Kim expected their usual shenanigans, but this day was different. Vince was leading Kim and Jason in a totally different route than they usually took to get to the tree by the canal, their usual acclaimed territory. "Where are we going?" asked Kim. "We usually take the back roads to get to the canal, don't we?" Vince looked back at Kim and smiled the way he always did when he had some kind of naughty scheme he wished to play out. "Well," he began, "there is a house a couple of blocks away, and a few people around here say it is haunted. I hear that everyone who moves in contracts some sort of strange illness and dies. The last group of people to move in was a couple who formerly ran a daycare center and had a ton of little children from an orphanage that shut down a while back. They offered to take in a few hundred kids who were left and take care of them, since these people were loaded, but they were rarely seen at all. They haven't been seen leaving the house for about a year, and the babysitter they hired for assistance was gone missing as well." Jason laughed pervertedly. "Two adults with that many kids who aren't theirs. That doesn't sound pedophile-ish at all," he commented in sarcasm. Kim laughed too. "Jason is right, though I don't think of rape right off the bat. It does sound weird to me that they would actually take in that many children." "I think it may be more of a murder-suicide," said Vince. When they reached the block where the house was located, they marveled at the scene at the end of the street. 3 white trucks were piled up at the huge multi-story house. Men in white containment suits were hauling large body bags out of the house and loading them into the trucks. "Hey Vince, look. Body bags. You might be right about it being a murder-suicide," chimed Kim. Vince glanced for a couple of more seconds before responding. "No, it can't be. If it were a murder, they wouldn't have those weird suits on, but I have seen them use those kinds of suits in contamination and radiation cases." They waited nearly half an hour for the trucks to leave before walking over to the mansion-like house. There was a notice on the door which read, "Condemned," and a sign with "Do not enter" scrawled in large painted letters. The door was left carelessly ajar, and, as Vince pushed it open with only a poke, a rush of foul air, smelling of rotten dead, poured out of the house and choked them. Jason started gagging as he propped against the wall of the porch. "What the... Damn, I am not going in there," gasped Jason. "Jason, seriously, Kim isn't as much of a pansy as you are," mocked Vince. He then looked back at Kim, who was already halfway in the doorway. "Come on, Kim, let's go." They expected to see a bloody mess as they entered. However, the house looked fairly clean, besides the stained carpets and what looked like mounds of white towels in the hall. Vince automatically jumped on the couch and picked up the remote, pointing it at the old-fashioned box television. "Damn it, it doesn't work," he yelled. "Well, no duh," replied Kim. "The house is condemned. They shut off the power and the water in this place a long time ago." "What is that strange lock on the door?" asked Jason. "I've never seen a lock like that before." "It's a special seal lock that cannot be reopened," explained Kim. "If the door shuts, we are screwed," commented Vince. "Try and find something to prop it open." At the same moment, a gust of wind blew hard against the metal door, causing it to swing closed. "Catch it, Jason!" yelled Kim, who also dove for the door. But it was too late. The door slammed shut and the padlock beeped and clicked, sealing the exit. Vince and Jason began yelling and cussing to one another. Only seconds later, Kim leaned against the sofa, sinking into the floor and trying not to lose her mind. "Will you two shut up?" she yelled. "Yelling and fighting won't do anything. Start thinking of a way to get out of here." Vince paced for a moment or two before he finally snapped. He pounded on the door and screamed at the top of his lungs. "Help, someone please! Get me out of here! Help me!" Vince's voice grew hoarse, and, as his energy drained, he fell to his knees and stared blankly at the floor, with a look of shock. "I'm starving," Jason announced. "Maybe there might be some food." Vince glared at Jason for only thinking about his stomach and then got up. Jason walked over to the open kitchen and began digging around, only to find nothing but rot in the room temperature refrigerator. "This sucks," he shouted. "We're not only stuck in this shithole, but we're going to starve in it as well." Vince paced a bit more before walking beside the couch and urinating on the floor. "Vince!" yelled Kim. "That's disgusting, bruh. Can you go somewhere else and do that?" "Are you insane?" replied Vince. "I know you have seen and read your share of horror to know the first rule about haunted places is to never go off alone." Vince trotted across the room with a sigh and squeezed behind the large retro television stand. "And he says he's not scared," said Jason in a snub manner. "Vince, it's obvious. You're just as bad as a dog. You always gotta take a piss when you're nervous or scared, so stop acting all high and mighty." "Jason, stop. We don't need any more fighting," sighed Kim. Vince did not reply for many moments, and Kim jumped when he finally yelled. "What the hell is this?" Kim got up from in front of the couch, and Jason rushed from the window to see what Vince was so worked up about. Kim covered her mouth, heaving at the sight she saw. A dead, hairless corpse of a dog, as white as paper with a touch of sickly blue, lay on the floor before them. Its eyes were open, beady black. The body was bloated, as if filled with water, and it had the putrid stench of death. Jason took a silver fork, which he had found in the kitchen, and poked the dead dog. Instantly, the body of the dog burst open and a reeking yellow fluid poured out all over the carpet. Kim backed away and threw up in the far corner of the wall. Vince and Jason pushed the television stand back in place and headed back to the couch. Kim followed and sat down on the floor, her favorite place to sit in any place. They sat there, thinking about what to do and how to get out. It started to get late, and the light faded quickly out of the inaccessible windows, high above the entertainment center. At a moment when all got quiet, Kim began to hear whispers from somewhere near. "Do you hear that?" Kim exclaimed. "I heard someone. Maybe someone is here to rescue us." She raised her voice, looking at the door. "Hello? Is anyone out there? We need help." The whispers only continued and moved from wall to wall. "I don't hear anyone," replied Jason. Chills ran down Kim's spine as she realized the whispers were coming from inside the house. Not only that, she was the only one who could hear them. They soon stopped, and only the silence remained. "It's freezing in here," Vince complained. He stuck his feet under the huge mound of blankets on the end of the couch and gave a look of awkwardness. "There's something squishy under these blankets," Vince said, before prodding under the blankets again. This time the blankets fell, revealing none other than 2 more bodies. They too were the paper white color, with the same undertone of sickly blue. The man and woman had both lost their hair, just like the family dog, and their faces were twisted in the most horrifying way. Their eyes were black and beady. "What the fuck?" Vince and Jason shrieked, their eyes widened in a look of pure horror. Vince, instinctively kicking to get away, kicked the bodies accidentally, causing both to bust, and the same putrid yellow liquid rushed out all over the couch and carpet. Kim backed up into a wall in the hall, the door next to her slightly ajar. A hand suddenly fell on her shoulder from the dark room, and more of the white rotting hand seemed to come to life, covering her mouth and grabbing her, trying to pull her into the darkness. Kim screamed and flailed, breaking free and running back towards the 2 boys. Before she could reach them, she was tackled and brought down by a girl, who still looked fairly normal and human. The girl grabbed Kim's feet and dragged her towards the room, looking her in the eyes with a look of pure insanity. Kim realized that this was the missing babysitter. She had gone mad from taking care of the sick children and witnessing the carnage the illness had caused. The babysitter giggled in a twisted tone, which soon turned into maniacal laughter, and she held Kim down as the zombie-like children crawled out of the piles they made on the floor and out of the room and piled on top of Kim. "Silly," exclaimed the girl. "Your brothers and sisters were waiting to play with you." The mindless zombie children bit down into Kim's flesh, her arms inside, as they ripped huge chunks of it from her. Kim screamed and the girl disappeared, saying, "Play nicely." Vince grabbed the television and threw it at the girl as he yelled, "Leave her alone!" Jason ran over and ripped the children off of Kim, smashing them against the wall until they did not move. As Jason picked Kim, weak and bleeding heavily, up off the floor, the girl leapt at him and hit him between the eyes with her fist. "No, she's mine!" the babysitter screamed as she picked up the silver fork and drove it into Vince's heart, killing him instantly. Jason crawled over to Kim as if to protect her, but the girl stepped on his neck and there was a loud snap. Jason's body fell limply to the floor, and he looked up at Kim one last time as his eyes dilated to a lifeless black. The children began to drag at Kim again, and the babysitter joined them. Kim screamed as they slowly dragged her into the darkness. The last thing she heard as her life faded out of her was the demented voices of the children and their babysitter singing, "Don't be afraid, the darkness will find you. Don't be afraid, it just wants your soul. Shadow, shadow, come take you away. Shadow, shadow has come to play." Slowly my eyes start to open in the low-lit room. The sun is starting to rise. It must be morning already. As I start to become more aware of my surroundings, I feel the familiar cold air numbing my toes and face. I look over to see my brother, still asleep. Even though we have to share a bed, our combined body heats didn't seem to provide much relief from the bitter cold. I look up and check the clock hanging on the wall. 6:30 already? We'd better hurry, I thought to myself. I roll over and tap on my brother's shoulder while whispering, "Jim, it's time to get up. We have to hurry before..." My whispering was cut off by a yawn and stretching. The stretch didn't last long. Once he became aware of how cold he was, he quickly balled up and started to shiver a little. What time is it?" Jim's lightly trembling voice was able to mutter. "It's 6:30. She'll be up here any minute," I replied. Once those words settled in, he quickly rose up to a sitting position, searching the room for the set of clothes he set out the night before. Without any further discussion, we quickly changed into the day's attire. As soon as I finished putting my last sock on, I heard the sound of the creaking door at the bottom of the stairs, as well as footsteps beginning to ascend the staircase. "Oh no, we're out of time," Jim blurted out in a loud whisper. "We haven't even started to make the bed yet." Our hearts were racing as we jumped up to the bed and began spreading the sheets and blankets. Thump, thump, thump. We hear coming from the stairs, each step getting louder as it gets closer. The frantic look on Jim's face as he looked at me seemed to be screaming, "Hurry!" The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs as we quickly tucked the blanket under the foot of the bed. As I heard the sound of the key turning to unlock the door, I grabbed my dirty clothes and launched them across the room to the basket. As the clothes landed, the bedroom door creaked as it slowly opened. Mother stepped into the room and placed the key into her blouse as she looked around. Did we actually pull it off in time? A smirk grew on her face as she said, "Good, now get downstairs and begin your chores." She turned around and started walking down the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. The steps grew quieter as she descended down the stairs. We took a brief moment to take a deep sigh of relief. "That was close," Jim half chuckled. A fake smile crept on my face, but I couldn't find the matter funny. It's been about 3 weeks since the last time we failed to clean the room in time. We were both caught still sleeping. That is certainly a day I do not wish to relive. Without wasting any more time, we both went downstairs and into the living room. There was a crackling of the wood in the fireplace as a warm radiance beamed onto my numb face. It felt absolutely amazing. I tried with all my might not to look like I was enjoying the heat, but I could not hold back a smile. I quickly shook the smile off my face and looked into the kitchen. Luckily for me, Mother was facing the other way as she was preparing breakfast. "What is today?" Jim asked. "Wednesday," I replied. "Floor's Day it is," Jim mumbled as he walked towards the closet and opened it. He came out with a bucket and 2 scrub brushes. We then cautiously and quietly walked into the kitchen and up to the sink so we could begin filling the bucket with soap and water. "Children are meant to be seen, not heard," Mother would say many times. Jim handed me the brushes and began filling the bucket while I grabbed the soap and poured some in. Once he was satisfied with how much water he filled it with, he attempted to lift the bucket over the sink. In doing so, the bottom of the bucket caught the top of the sink, throwing the bucket off balance. With a quick reaction, Jim was able to stop the bucket from tipping over and spilling everywhere. There was a panicked look on his face as he slowly lifted it the rest of the way above the sink before removing it. Just before taking the bucket into the living room, Mother turned to us and said, "Make sure the living room is completed before I finish breakfast. After we eat, I want to read my book. It had better be spotless, too." "Yes, ma'am," we replied. Mother didn't like being called Mom or Mother or even her name. She told us to always call her Ma'am. Honestly, I don't even remember what her actual name is anymore. We continued to haul the bucket to the living room and set it down towards the back. We weren't sure how fast we had to go because we weren't sure what Mother was making for breakfast, and of course we dare not ask. It's better to be safe than sorry. We began scrubbing quickly but thoroughly. We often tried to make our chores fun in some fashion. Sometimes we would make it a race. Sometimes we would turn it into some kind of game. For example, we would pretend that we were at war with the floor and our weapon was the brush while we wiped out the enemy. Boys will be boys, I guess. Other times we would just simply crack jokes or discuss silly topics like which one of us was born first. But no matter the activity, we would always make sure to not look like we were having fun. "If you have time for jokes and play, then you aren't working hard enough," Mother would say. As we were finishing up, we noticed Mother setting the table. Excellent, we finished in time. I took the bucket into the kitchen and dumped out the dirty water and placed it back into the closet. Jim and I washed our hands and helped finish setting the table. We waited for Mother to take her seat, and then we took our own. "Hand me your plate," she demanded as she lifted the lid off the top of the pot. I handed it to her, and she scooped out a pile of slop, we'll call it, and she handed it back to me. She motioned for Jim to do the same, and she filled his plate as well. She then covered the pot and scooped some eggs out of a pan and put it on her own plate. I've learned over time that holding your breath and not actually looking at the food is the easiest way to do it. The smell alone makes you want to gag, and the way it looks, it's as if chunks of rice were held together by snot. We can't let her see our disgust. We say thank you and begin eating. You don't have to feel bad for us. We're pretty used to it by now. In reality, the gross food is the least of our worries. Once finished, we helped clean up and continued on to our chores. The next floor on our list was the dining room. We again get a bucket of soak and begin scrubbing away while Mother grabbed a book from the shelf and began reading it. Mother rarely found enjoyment in books. She would usually criticize characters, especially the parents. After reading for a bit, she scoffed and said, "What do you expect when you don't discipline your children properly?" She then closed the book and looked around the living room. Her gaze seemed to have focused on something in the far side of the room. You could see anger itching into her face. "Boys, come here," she shouted. Quickly, we scrambled over to her as she stood up and walked to the other side of the room. "Who is responsible for this?" she asked while pointing at the ground near her feet. We looked down and noticed a smudge. Oh no, one of us missed a spot. Before we had time to think, Mother repeated louder, "Who is responsible for this?" That smudge was pretty centered in the room, so it wasn't really on either side. Technically, we both missed it. It'd be better if only one of us takes the blame, though. No need for both of us to be punished. Just as I was about to take responsibility for the action, Jim spoke up and said, "It's my fault." Mother glared at Jim and responded, "There, was that so difficult?" "No, ma'am," he replied. Mother lifted her hand high. Jim knew what was coming. There was no point in resisting. That only makes her angrier and will just lead to more punishment. Smack! As her hand landed on the side of his face, the force caused his body to collapse to the ground. I could hear Jim sniffle as he was wiping at his tears with his sleeve. "Get the brush and scrub it off," Mother boomed. She then walked over to the bookshelf and grabbed a different book to begin reading. I went back to scrubbing the dining room floor while Jim finished the living room. Not long after, he rejoined me in the dining room. Unfortunately, this day was far from over. As we finished, Jim picked up the bucket to take it into the kitchen to dump it out again. As he lifted it above the counter, the bottom of the bucket again caught the top of the counter, throwing it off balance. This time, however, he was not so lucky to keep it from spilling. The bucket dumped all over the counter and floor. Stomping footsteps could be heard coming from the living room. Mother screamed, "You stupid, stupid boy!" while striking Jim multiple times. After shoving him to the wet ground, she pointed at the closet and shouted, "Go get the mop and clean this mess up now." Jim was slightly hesitant to get up. "Run!" she continued. Jim got up as quickly as he could and started running towards the closet when the wet floor caused him to slip. Reaching for the counter to maintain his balance, he knocked over a plate that fell to the ground and shattered. You could see Mother's face turning red. In all the years of living here, I have never seen her this mad. She was so overwhelmed by anger that she couldn't speak. Not that she needed to. Everything she was thinking was written all over her face. Without a word, she grabbed Jim by the hair and dragged him through the broken glass all the way into her room. Before she slammed the door, she looked back at me with flames in her eyes. "Clean it," was all she said. Crash! Slammed the door. Trembling, I walked over to the closet. I was genuinely scared of what she was going to do to him. It's been a very long time since she took either of us into that room. As I opened the closet door, the screaming began. I could hear smacks and thuds followed by agonizing screaming. Jim was the one who got dragged into the room last time, too. Come to think of it, Jim was the receiver of the vast majority of punishments. It never really dawned on me until now how unlucky he truly is. Or how dumb, rather, for taking all the punishment so I don't have to. After cleaning up the mess, I went ahead and finished what was left of today's chores. Smack, thud, crash. The noises continued for what must have been nearly an hour. Jim's screams had been reduced to barely audible whimpers. Finally, the sound stopped. Shortly after, the door opened. Jim was struggling to crawl out of the room. He looked up at me. His face was black and blue, especially the right side. His nose was bleeding and his right eye was swollen shut. His hands were badly bruised and he could barely use them to pull himself forward. Mother then kicked him forward to clear him away from the doorway. Out of breath, she muttered, "Both of you, to your rooms, now." Jim was completely unable to stand. He tried his best, but I was doing most of the lifting. I helped him up the stairs and into bed. I heard Mother exiting her room and start walking up the stairs. Her silhouette emerged from the darkness below as she reached her bedroom door. As usual, without saying anything, she closed the door, inserted the key, and locked us in. The wind outside was howling and the bitter cold night had begun. Despite the cold, Jim was already passed out. He was exhausted and I can't blame him. I couldn't sleep for a while. Jim's screams were still ringing in my head. The bitter cold wasn't helping either. It took a while, but eventually I was able to fall asleep. When I awoke, my toes and face were numb, as usual. I looked over and was confused when I didn't see Jim laying in the bed next to me. Instead, he was sitting by the window, looking out. He was already dressed and his dirty clothes were already put away. But the way he looked, something seemed a bit off. I crawled out of bed and started putting my clothes on. "Hey Jim, you okay?" I asked. No response. "Jim?" Very slowly his head turned away from the window as he looked at me. The smile on his face was one of the most sinister things I have ever witnessed. The right side of his face was so swollen that his lips weren't functioning, so it was like a half smile. There were also 2 teeth missing on the top right side. I couldn't comprehend how he could smile when he must have been in so much pain. He hopped down to help me make the bed. We finished with plenty of time to spare. Usually we chat for a little bit when we wait to be released, but this time it was complete silence. I avoided looking at him most of the time. Something just wasn't right. Eventually we heard Mother coming up the stairs. The door unlocked and swung open. Once she was satisfied with the room, she simply said, "Get to work," and went back downstairs. "What is today?" Jim sputtered out. His words were nearly inaudible. "Thursday," I responded, not being able to maintain eye contact. "Ah, kitchen day it is," he managed to say. To be more accurate, it was kitchen day for him. Thursdays I work in the bathroom, making sure it's completely spotless. I nodded and then helped him limp down the stairs. I was going to aid him to the kitchen, but he assured me that he can do it. So we split up and got to work. I tried to work a little faster than usual so I could help Jim in the kitchen. I started from the top with the mirror and wiped it down, then the sink and bath. As I was just about to finish wiping down the walls around the tub, Mother walked in. "Get out," she told me as she walked toward the toilet. I quickly made my way out of the bathroom, closing the door on my way out. Once the door was closed, I turned around and almost walked into Jim, who was just standing there, looking at me. "Whoa, you startled me," I told him. He just stood there, looking at me. "Jim, what are you doing?" I asked. "If Mother finds you standing here..." A smile started to emerge on his face. It was the same sinister smile from earlier. He slowly lifted a finger to his mouth, motioning me to be quiet. He then reached his arm out, pushing me out of the way as he walked toward the bathroom door. "Jim, I don't think that's a good idea." At that moment, I noticed in the other hand he was holding one of the kitchen knives. Before I could say anything, the bathroom door opened. Mother was caught off guard to see Jim standing there. Using the element of surprise, he jumped at her, driving the knife into her chest. I couldn't watch. I quickly closed my eyes and looked away. There was a scream. It was Mother's voice, and then it was quiet. Terrified of what I might see, I instantly opened one eye. In my hand there was a knife. The knife was planted firmly in Mother's chest on the ground. She coughed and choked on her own blood. Confused, I stood up. I noticed my reflection and looked into the mirror. I saw my face was swollen, and I was smiling.